We all live and work in a multi-generational world. Each generation brings its own values, conditioning, and communication preferences to the workplace, and they're not always immediately compatible. If you work with someone from another generation, work for someone from another generation, or manage someone from another generation, you're going to want to hear what our guest in this episode, Gabby Rosely, has to say about how we can all get along better.
Welcome to the Gen XZ Exchange. I'm Chris Perkins, Gen X parent, now 50-something empty nester.
And I'm Lily Perkins, Gen Z career explorer. We swap insights on career choices, work and life in general.
So whether you're a Gen X parent trying to figure out midlife's challenges,
or a Gen Z young professional or student figuring out adulthood, you're in the right place. So, Dad, you will have worked with people from all different generations in your time. How do you handle it? Have you noticed any kind of patterns or anything?
Yeah, I think if I think back to my early career in my 20s, I was working for people who were in their 40s or 50s, I guess. But I don't think the generational divide between the boomers and Gen X was as big as it feels like it is now between Gen X and Gen Z. Mm-hmm. I think the youngest boss I've ever had was from a couple of roles ago. That was someone who was probably about 20 years younger than me. And there were some differences in communication style, but we still got on. It was still a really healthy, productive relationship. How about you, Lily? What differences have you seen with older co-workers or bosses?
I think I've actually had quite a lot of younger bosses or bosses more similar in age to me, and I think there's like a common thing of, because I'm younger and closer in age to the people that I'm supposed to be managing, I'm maybe going to be respected a bit less as an authority figure. So I feel like it can kind of go one of two ways with that, where they'll try and be a bit too pally and kind of relatable to like get you on their side, if that makes sense, or maybe go the complete opposite direction and be really, really strict and overbearing because that's in their mind how they're going to be taken seriously. And then older bosses that I've had, that is quite a common thing for people being on a power trip when you're like a younger member of staff or a student. I feel like we don't get the best reputation ever in the kind of roles that I've been in. So there can be a bit of like turning their noses down. But overall, I'd say the differences vary. But the main thing is everyone seems to be very aware of their age in relation to the other people that they work with. And it just kind of depends how secure they are within that. Like that will affect their actions that they take to be liked or respected.
Well, let's see what we can learn about some of those challenges then.
So our guest today is someone who we can definitely learn a thing or two from regarding the workplace dynamics. Gabby has a fascinating story as to how she found her 21-year-old self in a corporate role managing a team of boomers, Gen Xers, Millennials, and Gen Zs. So let's just say she did a lot of learning on the job, and we can now all benefit from those hard-won insights. Gabby, welcome to the Gen XZ Exchange.
Thank you guys so much, Chris and Lily. I'm so excited to be here and share a little bit about what I've learned and my story and being forged by the fire when I was in a management role at 21, because it was definitely interesting. And I really resonated with what you were saying, Lily, about how having younger managers being in that role, it's like you want everyone to like you, and you kind of have to understand the balance between being nice and being kind, but also being direct as a leader. And so that was a big challenge for me initially, because I wanted everyone to like me and be pally and be friends. Yeah. But then sometimes when you're not having the difficult conversations, it kind of turns around to bite you in the long run.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'll share a little bit about my story and how I ended up in that role. I grew up a very, very competitive swimmer. By the time I was in 8th grade, I was swimming for 5 hours a day before and after school. So it's an individual sport, a very intense one. So I've always kind of had this high performer, competitive, okay, you put your head down and you grind mentality. Mm-hmm. And I went out to California to swim in college, and I had a career-ending injury in my very first swim meet. And it was kind of like, who am I outside of my sport? I don't know. I got to figure it out. Yeah. And so then I channeled that kind of energy and that drive towards entrepreneurship. And I started a swim program that I ran for 3 years. And I had a team that we would go to different people's locations and we would teach swim lessons, but they were all my age or younger than me. So it was dip my toes into leadership, which is great. And I was more so friends. They were people, I had my brother and my sister working with me. I had some of my best friends, people I grew up swimming with. So very friendly leadership. And then when I graduated college is when I got hired for this management role. They had seen that I had swimming experience. They saw that I had leadership and management experience. And so they called me in and I met with the CEO and the president of the franchise, the VP of corporate development. And they were like, we don't even have the lease signed, but I think you'd be fit for the role. Do you want to join us? And I was like, yeah, okay. And so I did. And I was really there from day zero, really. And so I hired the team for the different positions. And it was my first time really doing the intense interviews where it's like, okay, here is the role and the responsibilities versus like, oh, you know how to swim. You can do this with me. And so that was kind of the start of the process. And then as we started to build and we had a couple of months before we even officially opened, that was getting to know my team. That was exercising all of the limiting beliefs that I had and trying to grow and expand myself as a leader and then learning the people that I was working with. So that was at 21. And then I was there for about 2 years before I left. And now I work with other multi-generational teams full time. And I work with executives to kind of expand their leadership styles and communication skills as well. So they can maybe learn from my mistakes.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. That's such a journey. And I know what you mean. I actually used to swim when I was younger as well. And I feel like you're right about, the individual sport thing. So very relatable there. So I know you have some thoughts on the historical influences that have shaped each generation. So starting there, do you think you could kind of run us through what are the key events that have contributed to each generation's outlook and if you saw them play out when you were in that first role when you were 21?
Yeah. Absolutely. This is my favorite thing to talk about. And I will say before I introduce any of the generations that they primarily describe American middle-class families because these are historical events that shape the worldviews. But of course, the very rich and the very poor have very different experiences and lifestyles. So I just want to frame that.
Definitely.
So let's start with baby boomers. Baby boomers are 1946 to 1964. And baby boomers they like context and they like hierarchy and they like tradition. And it's largely because of the way that they grew up and how they entered the workforce. So when we look at baby boomers, we know that they were growing up in post-World War II America. So this is a country coming back together. There's clear social roles. We were talking a little bit offline about how it was a primarily male-dominated industry to be in, career paths at all. And so we see a lot of confidence and abundance in the baby boomer generation. And then when we think about how that has them showing up at work, we can recognize that they value the hierarchy and defer to seniority a lot. So Chris, you were talking about how you had bosses that were a lot older than you initially. And that's because depending on how long you were at the company, then you moved up in the leadership ladder, if you will. And so there's a lot of respect and loyalty given to employers and also given back to the employers because baby boomers were the last of the covenant generation. So they had the promise oftentimes from their very first employers that they would be carried through to retirement, oftentimes paid a pension. And then we don't really have that anymore. So that's why we see everybody kind of hopping on the backs of Gen Z and millennials and like job hoppers and stuff because there's not that same degree of loyalty.
Yeah, I think that context that you described pretty much fits the UK too.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
In terms of their position, yeah, more or less identical.
Good to know. And so then we'll go into Gen X, which is 1965 to 1980. And Gen X is a very independent generation. I love Gen X. I really do. And I always say that they march to the beat of their own drum because they grew up with a very independent philosophy about life. There was also a lot of skepticism in this time. Mom and dad oftentimes had to be at work. So this created latchkey kids. So the kids were in after school programs or running around in the neighborhood with neighborhood kids doing God knows what. And weren't necessarily sharing or debriefing about their days like millennials and Gen Zers eventually would because the parents were at work or just had other responsibilities to support the family because there was some economic instability. And so they're very, very independent. And then of course in America, we've got the Watergate scandal, we got the AIDS epidemic. So it's like, okay, we can't trust our jobs to take care of us anymore. We can't trust the people we put into power. Like, who can we trust? So a lot of skepticism in that generation as well.
Gabby, have you ever heard anything about the origin of the term Generation X?
I have not, actually. I know that they're the sandwich generation, but I don't know if that has anything to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen anything. My hunch has always been, because we fall into that bracket, 65 to 80, we were given that badge when we were young people. My theory, at least in the UK, is the name has something to do with the punk band Generation X.
Oh my God.
Because we were seen as kind of the scrappy,
rebellious,
up and coming generation, the whole punk ethos. I don't know if that's the case, but that's always been my theory behind it.
I'm going to have to listen to some Generation X songs after this podcast.
We need to do some research and find out the meaning behind the name. But that would make sense because you were, well, in the UK in the 80s. Wow, yeah, there would have been a lot of like punkiness and having to kind of like claw your way up through the shit. Sorry, Grandma, again.
Now we're seen as the old folks, but originally we were named after the whole punk ethos. I think. Yeah.
That is so funny. My boyfriend's mom just sent me a reel the other day about, she was a voice actress and she was imitating the different decades of female actresses.
Yeah, I saw that video. That was so interesting. Is that similar
Right?
kind of thing here? Like, obviously, the social political environment that you're in is going to shape things like that. I would never thought about voice for workplace styles. This is all making sense. But that was really interesting because there's some overlap there in what we're talking about now. So, obviously, we've got the same reels coming up. I've got the same FYP.
Yes,
Perfect.
which is so funny because you were just talking about grunge and rebellious nature, and that was 1980s. Like that was what
that
she
was what I
meant.
was saying.
She
Exactly.
like kind of had a voice like this, and like was rolling her eyes, and like that was exactly
The
what
Valley
it was.
Girl thing. Exactly.
So yeah, I love Gen X though. So then millennials are 1981 to 1996. And very interesting generation because this is like technological advancement is through the roof.
Yeah.
You got the .com boom. So people can start companies in their parents' garages if they want to. This is the first time where you're really able to choose your life path. Like you're in a cafeteria, choose your college major, choose your career path. So a lot of opportunity and a lot of optimism. And the one thing that I really like to bring up that differentiates millennials and Gen Zers from Gen Xers and boomers is that millennials and Gen Zers were raised with the engage, discuss model versus boomers and Gen Xers were raised with a command obey style in the education systems and at home. So it was like a do as I say because I said so, no questions asked. And then when we see millennials and Gen Zers being raised in education systems as well, it was like, do you have any questions? Let's talk about it. So just a lot more dialogue in the younger generations. And so millennials really value the ability to self-express, whether it's their hair color, tattoos, or simply dialogue and collaboration in the workforce. Really big.
Yeah, that's really interesting in terms of those formative years. Their educational experience was founded on an adult being willing to discuss things with them. Whereas my generation, it was you were just told what to do and you diligently did your work. Yeah.
And you would get a belt across the hands.
Yes.
Crazy.
So different. Yeah. So I would say that's a really standout thing for me when I break the generations apart. It's you can definitely tell who had more dialogue as they were growing up versus who didn't. Not that one is better than the other, but I think that we can learn from each style, like the independence and the collaborative nature. And then Gen Z, our generation is so interesting. We've had so much going on. I know that every generation has, but yeah, a lot. I think that some of the biggest events, smartphones being introduced in 2010, constant noise, hyperconnectivity, the highlight reel, comparison culture, cancel culture. People are alienated so much so from what reality is because we don't even have to experience real reality if we don't want to.
Yeah, what even is reality anymore? Exactly. That's a lot.
Exactly. We can escape to virtual reality if we want to nowadays. It's like, what is real? So that's really interesting. And there's a lot of anxiety in our generation as well because of the constant instantaneous feedback loop, whether it's Instagram likes or comments or being able to call your friend and see if they're home instead of having to ride your bike and go see, and, oh, maybe they're not. Oh, but you see them on the way. But, so there's a lot of anxiety in our generation. Mental health is not great, but Gen Z is also very creative and very entrepreneurial. So whenever I work with teams and they're struggling with lack of engagement with their Gen Zers, I always say, how can you help them to leverage their strengths? And how can you create more of this entrepreneurial opportunity for those that are interested in it in their roles? How can you help them to think and get creative so that they feel like they have a little bit more autonomy? Because that's also really important to Gen Z.
No, that's super cool. Yeah, I think definitely the creative entrepreneurial side of it. I'm part of this like student ran society in Glasgow called the Glasgow Charity Fashion Show, and that's a big group. There's like 100+ people in the society, and everyone's super like takes it really seriously, takes a lot of pride in it. It's really interesting seeing how people come together and have all these amazing creative ideas. So that's like a really good example of the stuff you've just described. So that's interesting and validating to hear.
Yeah, absolutely.
From everything you said, these various events will have shaped the values of each generation. And we've discussed this a little bit already, but what do you see in terms of how that drives how they try to connect with and motivate people, especially?
I think it shows up in their values and then communication styles. So if we look at baby boomers, we know that they value kind of honoring how things were.
Yeah.
They value professionalism because they equate professionalism with respect. So punctuality is really important. Instead of wearing a sweatsuit and dropping the F-bomb in the meeting, they're going to say, nope, put on a blazer and let's, talk like this is a really important meeting. So that is going to show up in the way that they communicate. And it's also going to show up in the way that they receive communications from other people. So I always say that the generations are just scratching the surface. Like you got to have individual conversations with each person, but it's important to know, especially when you're interfacing with maybe a new client or somebody for the first time. Whereas a Gen Zer, you might be able to reference a TikTok. Yeah. You're going to keep it a little bit more professional with a boomer, right? Like that's kind of intuitive, but
definitely.
You can take it a little further.
Like your Reels conversation. I mean, that was just straight over my head. Right?
Yeah. You're like, what is a reel? Yeah.
Exactly.
But you're right. I wouldn't be showing grandma, oh, look at this funny TikTok I found. And it's one of those like brain rot things, because I feel like they would look at me like I needed like professional help or something. So
exactly.
Definitely. Yeah.
So it's kind of like read the room a little bit, but also, have the conversation if necessary. And so then when I think about Gen X, they really don't like being micromanaged. They also really enjoy the time for them to be able to incubate ideas. So if you know that you're working with Gen Xers who are independent, they're very direct and they're straightforward, you don't have to worry about the fact that they didn't include a lot of exclamation points or emojis in their email. They're just direct, and that's how they communicate. They're not mad at you.
That's such a big one, actually, because me and Charlie, my brother, have an in joke about, like, I think it's a really common thing, like dad texts. But a lot of Gen X dads, you'll send them like a message and they'll say, okay, full stop.
Literally.
And me and Charlie are screenshotting it to each other, like, look what dad said.
You?
And it's just for a normal, but it'll be like a normal message from you, like just being like, okay, full stop, no emojis, no tone, no nothing. And we're like, he's so funny. Because
I do remember getting schooled on the O and the K being passive aggressive and OKAY being a bit more
chill,
friendly.
Yeah, okay, full stop is what I would send someone if I was really pissed off with them. So,
okay.
But I know that you don't mean that. But that is interesting. How that's
direct.
like a subtle thing. You're just being direct. Yeah.
But it's so real, and I joke about that with my dad, or even like older clients that I work with too.
Yeah.
I always have to remind myself. I'm like, they're not mad at me. It's okay.
Yep. Just because they didn't send 10,000 emojis, like we're all good.
Yes.
Fully.
And same thing too. Like if Gen X isn't super verbal on a Zoom meeting, it doesn't mean that they're not engaged. It just means that they prefer to like incubate, and then whatever they got to do, they'll get done, but they don't need as much of a conversation about it as millennials or Gen Zers might. So I feel like just not taking things personally is really big. Sometimes, you got to be like, okay, where is this a reflection of our relationship? But like not taking those kinds of things personally is really important.
It probably goes back to, there was the engage, discuss model. And what was the one that you said related to Gen X, Gabby?
Command, obey.
Yeah, that's our frame of reference. Command, obey, rather than engage, discuss. It's that playing out.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. So it's just helpful to know so that you don't take those things personally or be like, oh my gosh, I'm drawing assumptions that don't really have any roots in reality. So yeah, then millennials, I think that because of that engage, discuss model, they really appreciate dialogue about tasks or projects, really gravitate towards whether it's Zoom or Slack or Asana. It's like, okay, let's collaborate using this project management tool. And if I have questions, I want to be able to talk these things out. I want to be able to, whereas Gen X and baby boomers are like, I'm just going to figure it out. Like, that's what you do.
Yeah. Why is my phone dinging so much? Just leave me alone.
Exactly. They're like, I'm going to figure it out. That's what you do. What else, you know?
Yeah.
So that's really big. And I always say for the engagement of millennials, when you can invite millennials to share their opinions, they probably have some really, really great ideas, but it's also going to help them to feel like they're valued, which is a really big value of millennials is they want to feel valued and they want to be able to express themselves and their thoughts and their opinions and all of that fun stuff. There's a time and a place, of course, but
yeah.
And then Gen Z is, yes, we are digital natives, but I think that keeping the frame of reference that all the generations prefer to have important conversations in person. So not making the assumption that everything should be digital with Gen Z, even though it is our native language, it doesn't mean that you're gonna, onboard a Gen Z completely online if you could have them in person or fire a Gen Z or online like they
over text.
Yeah, right.
Not ideal.
So yeah, that's important. And then Gen Z also because they have this constant need for validation, they require more frequent feedback. Whereas baby boomers, it's like, if you get any feedback, it's probably because something's wrong.
Yeah.
And so it's like when you hear like hey, can I talk to you in my office? Of course, that kind of all brings a little bit of anxiety up in us. But baby boomers were like, if I'm getting feedback at all, and some Gen Xers, it's bad. But Gen Zers and millennials, we want to hear what we're doing well and what we're not doing well. So the feedback loop needs to be more frequently exercised for Gen Z and millennials for sure.
Definitely. I feel like whenever I've had someone like a manager at work say something nice about me or like give me like a gold star, I'll literally like text my group chat. I'm like, oh my God, someone said that I did something well. And it does feel like a lot. I don't know, obviously as a generational thing, but it does feel like it's a bigger deal to people my age than it would be if like the older member of staff that was there got told he was doing something well. I'd probably be like, okay, like didn't need that. So definitely, I love a gold star.
We can be really dismissive of praise and appreciation. It's almost like we're expecting the feedback is only ever criticism or, highlighting what you could do better. So, yeah, it does feel odd when it's positive sometimes.
Yes, absolutely. I'm glad that you put that little piece of experience and just like your own thoughts in there, because I can read about all these things, but a lot of my research is developed because I have conversations and I hear from you guys where it's like, yeah, when I get a gold star from a manager, I text my group chat and I'm like, hip, hip, hooray. Yay. Chris, you're like, okay, yeah, whatever. Yeah. Like, I don't think that, this is important or whatever to talk about right now.
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly.
Super interesting.
Yeah, we've spoken a bit about what people might get wrong and do differently. You've mentioned about communicating with people and actually asking people what suits them, because if you don't ask, you're likely to get it wrong. Do you think there's anything else kind of in that same vein of like avoiding making assumptions about different generations? Is there any other advice you could give people about how to avoid getting it wrong across generations?
Yeah, I think it really starts with taking inventory of what your assumptions are right now. So what do you tend to think about the older generations? What do you tend to think about the younger generations, the good and the bad? And just being super aware and honest with yourself about where you're starting from. And I think that the generational knowledge, again, like I said, is very, very helpful and it scratches the surface. But then I think it calls leaders and even members of the team that might be struggling with communicating with a coworker or somebody that they work on a project with that they're not leading necessarily, but they're working peer to peer with, to then have the important conversations of like, okay, how do you prefer to communicate? Because when I email you, it takes you 4 weeks to get me a response. Do you prefer that I call you? Do you prefer that I text you? Like, let's talk about modality. Let's talk about frequency. Let's talk about feedback. I think that those are, some really important kind of benchmarks that you want to open the conversation for. but really starting out with what assumptions am I already making? And then, challenging those with your own experiences, but also experiences from other people. Maybe you're researching, maybe you're hearing from friends or family where it's like, hey, I work with a Gen Xer and they seem to always be super dismissive of me all the time. Like, so I've just drawn this assumption. Do you have similar experiences, or do you have, one that might negate this assumption that I've made? And just having more conversations about these things.
No, sounds ideal. Because you're right. If you don't ask, you want to have this knowledge as like a backdrop, but you don't want to generalize too much. And you're right. The only way you can really get to the bottom of someone's styles that they like with communication or whatever is by asking. So
for sure.
But just on that point, I would say as a Gen Xer, we would find that slightly odd to some extent if it's at the beginning of a working relationship, that someone is either laying down those expectations or they're asking about assumptions, and it goes back to like, we just get on with it, we'll figure it out rather than talk about it. So I think from the perspective of the older generations, we have to be more open to having those kind of conversations, because it is slightly unnatural in some sense. It's not the way we were kind of brought up in the workplace. You kind of kept your head down and get on with it.
Whereas for me, I would love that.
Yeah.
I would love if someone was like, would you prefer if I emailed you or texted you? Because I hate sending emails. I'd be like, literally just phone me.
Yeah.
But you're right. I think Gen Z are kind of expected to compromise and budge because we're kind of like the newcomers into the workforce. There's a lot more of an expectation that we'll kind of work around other people a little bit. But it is nice to hear you say, Dad, that Gen X should maybe consider being a bit more open to different styles of communication, because like as much as we're new and joining you guys, it's also nice to feel welcomed and like yous are getting with the times. So yeah.
And then equally, you should feel comfortable with having those conversations with new colleagues or new bosses. How are we going to get along? How are we going to make this work?
Yeah, definitely.
It's funny how when baby boomers were entering the workforce before or after the silent generation, they got hazed, quote unquote. And then same thing happened to Gen Xers by the boomers. And then same thing happened to millennials by the Gen Xers. And now it's Gen Zers with, the older generation. So there is kind of that, like, all right, you pay a little bit.
So rite of passage. Yeah.
The rite of passage. Right. But then having the openness, because we're stronger together. I thoroughly believe that. And when we have more perspectives, we have deeper understanding and we have better relationships. We have higher performance, all of that.
Yeah. Love that.
And within the next 10 years, we'll have Generation Alpha entering the workforce. So some of the boomers and some of the Gen Xers will still be there, so we'll have to manage across all five.
Exactly.
Gabby, this topic actually came up in a conversation I had with one of our listeners a couple of weeks ago, a colleague of mine. So hi to Katerina. She had a question for you, and that was whether you see a gendered element to some of these challenges. I don't know if you see any patterns depending on whether it's men or women doing the managing or being managed.
Yeah, definitely. So when I was reflecting on this question, I was thinking first about the older generations, boomers not necessarily being super women populated in the workforce when boomers were growing up. Just because of the social roles at the time. It was a different time, especially in America. And so there weren't as many women in the workforce, which meant that tenure wise and just longevity of career wise, there didn't end up being as many women in leadership or management roles. And so now we're seeing a lot more women in these leadership roles, which is fantastic, something to celebrate. I know that some of the women that I've worked with do struggle with finding respect and asserting themselves from this place in executive presence and being really respected by their peers and other leaders on their teams, just because they might still be drawing the assumptions that a leadership role may be a man's position. And so, yeah, I think it's interesting, but I think the more that we're aware of it and the more that we recognize that each generation, each gender, each culture, each set of experiences brings a unique set of strengths and something to learn from, that I think is really, really important. And then I will say that with Gen Z, something I was thinking about just, on my own experience, I think that girls, especially with smartphones becoming popular in 2010 and then the front-facing camera in 2013, the social media mental health was harder on girls than it was on guys. It was still very difficult on young boys growing up, but on girls, because of the comparison culture. Yeah. And so I think that when we see Gen Zers in the workforce, the women are very comparative of themselves to maybe it's other people on the team or other, as a solopreneur, other solopreneurs of like, well, what are they doing? Is the grass greener? I'm not doing enough. So there's a lot more like anxiety loop, I think, for the women in terms of comparison. But then men, there's like the very similar kind of anxiety loop of like, oh my gosh, like I need to be this provider and I need to, step into this role. But like, how do I do that?
Yeah, all the manosphere stuff, all of that kind of propaganda certainly hasn't helped men, I imagine, as well.
Yeah, yeah.
But that is really interesting. I think the challenges of growing up as a girl and just being a girl anyways, and then also having literally everything reflected back to you on social media and all of the internalized beliefs you might have about like the imposter syndrome you might have about being a woman in the workforce, whatever, all of that combined with the curse of social media, I feel like that's just a big recipe for a whole new set of challenges that Gen Z are going to have to navigate and are navigating. But yeah, not fun, but also really interesting that that's such a big element of like we've grown up with that. So of course that's going to affect how we are. But sad a little bit. We need to pick the vibe up and be like girl bosses.
Absolutely.
In the workforce and all that stuff. I feel like as well what you're saying about the grass is greener thing as well. I think I've noticed it even in uni and stuff, like because now you feel like as a young woman you're having to make up lost ground. Sometimes you can find yourself competing with other women for the same spots and positions as well, because you're like, well, I want to be a successful woman and there's all these other women who want to be successful too. So it's just the endless feedback loop thing that you're talking about. But all the stuff you're saying about how everyone brings their own strengths, like every culture, every gender, we do just need to tap into that a bit more.
Sure. And I think that it's also important to note as, men and women that like we have, of course, our unique set of strengths, but are also our unique set of struggles. And so I wouldn't say like when I answer this question that I see more struggle from maybe a different gender or a different generation, but just different kinds of struggles. Yeah.
Yeah, fully. It's not competition, but
yes, exactly. Yeah.
We all just need to give each other cut each other some slack and give each other a bit of a leg up, I think.
Absolutely.
So on the topic of workplace communication, that's obviously at the core of getting things done in life, but also at work, getting on with your colleagues. What kind of patterns are you seeing in terms of how each generation likes to receive feedback? Obviously, we know that I want gold stars and a pat on the back. That's my main thing.
Yeah, it's funny. So I guess I'll start with Gen Z. Like I said, Gen Z does appreciate more frequent feedback, and it's not just that they want the gold star or the good feedback. We also want to know where we can grow. And so I keep referencing that, Gen Z has this feedback loop and, more anxiety about just life in general, but that doesn't mean walk on eggshells with Gen Z. There's a difference between being kind and being nice, where it's like nice, you kind of feel like you're beating around the bush. Kind, you can have the difficult conversation out of respect, but you still say what needs to be said. And I think that Gen Z appreciates kindness, but also the frequency is really important in the feedback.
Yeah.
Millennials, I would say if I had one piece of advice, it would be like, what do you think about the situation? Here's what I think. Like, I'd love to hear your thoughts. So Gen Z really is looking for mentorship, I think, right now, and the frequency of feedback. Millennials are looking for the same thing, but also for conversation. And it helps them to, again, like receive things when they're a part of the conversation. And then I would say Gen X, be very intentional about the feedback, because Chris, like you were saying, if it's all the time, first of all, it's not going to be as valuable. And you're going to be like, okay, I've heard this a million times before. Now you're just saying this to appease me. And now I'm going to start thinking that like something's going on behind the scenes. Yeah. So I would say being really intentional with the feedback that you're giving and very specific as well. So instead of just saying, hey, Chris, really nice job today. It's like, okay, whatever, man. Where it's like, okay, Chris, like you set all these questions up really well. I felt super prepared. Like, thanks for taking the time to do that. That to me, I've seen in my experience go over a lot better with Gen Xers than vague and like super frequent feedback. Yeah. And similar to boomers as well. Giving context is super important. And just like shouting them out for their hard work, because they value hard work and they are really hardworking. So shouting them out for it. But again, same as Gen Xers, not super frequently, and being very contextual and specific when you do.
That all makes sense. And I think what you've already said in terms of just having an appreciation for these generational differences, I guess in terms of what to take into account when you're giving feedback or when you're on the receiving end of it, what would you say to people in terms of how to respond if the feedback doesn't correlate with your preferences, your typical communication style?
This is going to be more of just like an emotionally intelligent kind of, okay, ground yourself before you jump into reacting versus responding. But if you ever find yourself getting stirred up or kind of knocked off your rocker a little bit in the way that something is delivered to you, number one, you're not in a rush to respond in that moment. So take a moment to kind of center yourself, let your breath be your first word, and make sure that you are not speaking out of like anger or being dismissive because you don't agree, because that's going to have, you know, domino effects in the long term. So take a moment to ground yourself and center yourself. And also remembering too, don't take the delivery personally. Sometimes the context is like, okay, well, what they're saying might be like really taking a jab at my character right now. But I would say that the delivery itself, like maybe it feels harsh. Okay, just take a moment and be like, hold on, this is less about me and more about how the other person communicates. So kind of, just speaking contextually in that moment and not taking it personally is important. And then also it is okay to say like, okay, this is a little bit hard for me to handle right now. You know, this is coming at me. This is a little bit direct in the moment, but I hear you. And I'm going to take a second to process this because I want to be better, be reflective, be humble, you know, want to maintain curiosity and humility, but it's okay to say like, oh, wow, this is kind of knocking me off my rocker a little bit, you know, like
I need a cup of tea.
That's all right.
So you mentioned mentoring a few moments ago. And I love the story of a 77-year-old woman asking you to be her mentor and that you still work together. And that is truly an amazing example of intergenerational working. Can you tell us something about how that came about? And has she ever shared with you what led to her to approach you?
Yes. Her name is Linda, and I still work with Linda to this day. And it's so amazing because she was my very first client that had anything to do with the work that I'm doing, speaking, workshops, consulting programs, executive coaching clients. She was my very first one.
Wow.
So very special. And basically she was a part of the Chamber of Commerce. And at the position for the swim school that I was managing at the time, I was in her chamber. And so she was at our ribbon cutting and we met for the first time, you know, with the big scissors and cutting for the grand opening. And so then we started chatting and they invited me to be on a webinar for women in leadership. And after my talk, she reached out to me immediately afterwards. And she was like, I was just so moved by some of the things that you were talking about. And I've been looking for a business mentor and a personal mentor. And I feel called to ask, would you work with me and be my mentor?
Fantastic.
And it was such a beautiful ask and such a great thing to be reflected back to me. But I had no idea what I was doing. But I was like, okay, listen, I've never done this before, but I think I can do it. I would love to do it with you. If you know that I am going to be as open and honest and transparent about, you know, what I've done in my past and where we're going, and we can work together. And she was like, absolutely. And so, that was a very, very special moment for me. And I think that I learned so much from her and she learned so much from me. And so that has taught me so much about the generational differences, but in the generational strengths and just like different skills as well. You know, it's funny, like the last thing that we worked on in one of our calls was LinkedIn and online presence and, you know, building a network and not having to go meet every person that you connect with for coffee, but maybe scheduling a Zoom instead so you can still build relationships. So teaching more about the online interface with her is something I feel like as a Gen Xer I can give to her, a part of the older generations that I think is really beneficial. So super special.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah, fantastic. And it sounds like it's working both ways. You know, even though she approached you initially, you're learning things from her perspective, which is what it's all about. Yeah,
absolutely. I learned so much from her. She's so wise. I tell her all the time. I'm like, I'm so grateful that I have you as a mentor. So, yeah.
So you said she was your first client in that respect. So this maybe relates to something else I learned about you in terms of your motto of saying yes before you're ready. Sounds like that was an example of that. Seems like a great guiding principle to have in place. How did that come about and how's following that motto led you to where you are today?
1000%. That's a great example of it, where it was like, I know that I want to do this. I am struggling with this imposter syndrome because that is one of my biggest limiting beliefs of like, oh no, am I qualified to do this? I started out when I was 21. People didn't trust me to do the job I was hired for because they're like, oh my God, she's so young. She doesn't have experience. And I always say, well, how do you get experience? You get experience.
Really?
So you got to start somewhere.
Yep.
And oftentimes that means that you have to do it scared. That means you have to say yes before you're ready.
Mhm.
So I truly, truly do live by that principle because it leads you to a lot of really fun stories and a lot of like, just memories and things you get to laugh about with your friends, but also like huge milestones in career, starting a podcast before I even had a microphone, and I used my phone, and I would do voice memo recordings on my phone before I had any of the equipment. It got me started. And now here we are.
Yeah.
I moved to Chicago, and I'm living now in an apartment before I had enough like sustainable income to like get myself to a point where I was like, okay, comfortably, I can pay all my bills and do all these things. But I took the chance and I did what I needed to do to give me the cushion to get there. But I wasn't ready by all means. I was just like, okay, I'm going to do it and I'm going to figure it out.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's just led me to so many amazing things. And I would say that everybody, even the most successful people in the world, struggle with imposter syndrome. So it's not the imposter syndrome that's holding you back. It's your relationship with saying yes, scared. You have to be able to do things scared and get comfortable with being in a fear state, but choosing to remember that you're safe and that things are working out in your favor anyways.
Yeah, because you'll never truly be ready. Like you could sit at home, like YouTubing how to do this thing, like how to start this, like how to start my business, whatever. But like, you're right. You can only read so much and learn so much, but actually not to include a swimming pun, but sometimes you do just need to like dive in,
Yes.
See what I did there?
Very good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we've talked about imposter syndrome before. And, all that growth comes when you kind of step outside the comfort zone. You've got to do something different and push yourself a bit. Yeah.
For sure. Absolutely.
So looping around to something a bit different now, Dad, I know you've said that if you were going to do your career again, instead of waiting for retirement, you would plan to do a 6 to 12 month sabbatical every 7 to 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously for you, Gabby, you walked away from everything, sold all your belongings and moved to Costa Rica for a bit after feeling like you'd burned out a wee bit and you were maybe misaligned in your corporate role. So that sounds like a pretty intense sabbatical, and that's quite, that's segued on quite nicely from what we were talking about diving into things head first. So what was that like, and how do you think your life is different now compared to if you hadn't dove in and went for that?
Yeah, that's a really big one. And the one thing that I want to say is I feel like my life is on a very, I quote unquote, fast track. And when I say fast track, I don't mean that I'm like accomplishing things like better or at a better pace or better rate. But I think that I gather lessons and I just like, I go all in, I dive in head first, like we're talking about, and I gather, I like, integrate, and then I grow. And oftentimes I think I move through chapters and I move through experiences in my life because I garner those lessons and the wisdom that I need from it, that my spirit is calling for, in condensed, just, I guess, small durations of time. So even though I was only in my corporate role for about 2 years, I had learned so much and I had grown so much. And that's when I had started my podcast when I was there. And then I started working with Linda, and then things started to kind of spiral. And so it was January of 2024 that I left that role. And about 2 weeks after I left the role, I had a great relationship with my boss and my team there. And so set up my assistant manager to take over my role as general manager, told my boss 2 months prior to me, going and leaving, because I was like, I want to do this as respectfully and supportively as possible. So it was great.
Yeah.
And so January, 2 weeks after I officially left, was when I moved out to Costa Rica. And I had found a volunteer exchange through an app called Workaway. And essentially I was staying and eating for free in exchange for 20 hours of work on the permaculture farm that they had there. And then I also helped them with their marketing for their ecotourism business, because I had experience with, my first jaunt in entrepreneurship and then with the goldfish and stuff like that. So the experience there was, I would say, the best thing that I learned, the most important lesson was, if I cannot find peace here, I'm not going to find it anywhere.
Yeah.
And there's a really big thing, I think, especially in our generation, Lily, Gen Z, that like, because this grass is greener on the other side, that, oh, if I could just leave my corporate job, or if I could just, move out of my hometown, all my problems are going to be solved.
Fully. And it's like, well, I was actually watching a TikTok or something as well. It was like to do with Anthony Bourdain, and someone was saying there's a quote about like, wherever you go, you have to take yourself with you. So whatever you've got going on in the inside, your new apartment, your new job, you're taking yourself with you. So if you're not happy with what you've got, it's not looking good for whenever you get that shiny new thing.
Absolutely. So I just, and two, I was in a time in my life where I didn't have a mortgage. I was living with my parents. Such a blessing. I didn't have a boyfriend at the time. I put my car in storage because I had paid for my car, up front. And then I just put it in storage. So the car insurance, it was like, all right, it's in storage, whatever. So I didn't have a lot of things that were holding me back.
Yeah.
And I've known for years that I wanted an experience like this. And I was like, well, now is kind of the time.
Yeah.
So, here I'm going to answer the call and I'm going to go.
Yeah, let's go.
And so, yeah, I definitely dove into that. I learned a lot while I was there. I focused my time and my energy fully on where I was at. I wasn't super in communication, back home, of course, every now and then, or I'd send texts, but I was really trying to be exactly where my feet were, and integrate all the things that I was learning while I was there. And yeah, very, very transformative experience. Funny enough, even though there were so many things that were great, it was an extremely difficult time in my life because I was outside of anything and everything that I had ever known or defined myself by. And so I had to basically completely meet myself while also going through a career transition and being like, oh my gosh, I should be using this time wisely to, figure out what I'm going to do for my next step, but I don't know what it is. And I don't know if I'm good enough and I don't know who I am. And like, the whole freaking
feedback loop.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it was interesting, but quite the dive.
No, that sounds good. I like what you're saying about the like the fast track thing. Everything we've spoken about and what Dad was saying about imposter syndrome, like ultimately if you're not the type of person to just like do it scared, do it anyways, and put yourself into those positions when you're not ready, you're not gonna grow. So it makes sense that you feel like your life's kind of on the fast track, because it sounds like you're good at just saying, well, now's my time. So I might not feel ready, but we're going.
Yes.
Off to Costa Rica I go.
Yeah.
No, I love it.
You're a great example of that. That's an incredible story. And as you say, you've been able to package all of that experience and learn from it and apply it to what you're doing now.
Thank you.
And if people want to know more, where can they go to learn about the programs that you provide and how to work with you?
LinkedIn is my favorite social media app these days. And so I post a lot on LinkedIn. My website is very descriptive about my process and the kind of work that I do, which is just GabbyRosely.com. My first and last name is how you can find me on LinkedIn. So Gabby Rosely. And I'm very, very active. So if you send me a DM and you want to just connect for a coffee chat, let me know. I'm always so happy to learn from and connect with anybody and everybody. So send me a LinkedIn DM and then I'll send my website over to you, Chris and Lily, so that you can.
Yeah, we'll put all those links in the show notes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
You can find me there. And I basically, where I specialize, again, multi-generational teams, but it's the development. It is leadership presence for Gen Z executives. I do different retreats and conferences that are workshop or keynote based. And then I do consulting programs that are individual coaching packaged with group workshops, webinars, ongoing performance and metrics and assessments and all that fun stuff. So if you're interested in that, you can also send me a DM on LinkedIn or submit a quote on my website.
Perfect.
Fantastic. We'll include all of that in the notes. Thank you so much. That was a fascinating discussion.
That was super cool.
So thank you for all of those insights. Really, really useful. I think you've covered a lot of things that people can take away in terms of how they can get on better with the people that they work with and the people they're around about, and address some of the challenges that we've spoken about in terms of feedback and intergenerational issues across different workplaces. So thank you for taking the time to join us. Really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was super interesting. And also I think everyone listening's like that super nail on the head for the kind of stuff, like the feedback we've been getting. That's the kind of stuff that people want to hear. So absolutely perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I love this so much. And I've genuinely enjoyed you guys hosting and the conversation. So really want to shout you guys out for being great hosts too. This was so fun.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
thank you. That's really lovely feedback. No, that was a really fun episode. Really enjoyed.
Yeah, same.
So thank you.
Thank you guys so much.
So thanks, Gabby.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you guys. You're awesome.
So, Dad, obviously you've got the Gen X perspective here. Do you have any key takeaways that you'd like to share with us and any ideas that you think you might put into practice in future?
What really stood out for me, I think, was how accurate I felt Gabby's take was on the different generations.
Yeah.
She has a really good read on Gen X and my frame of reference. And from what I know from what we've talked about and having two Gen Z children, it seemed like she had a really good feel for Gen Z, obviously, which is the generation that she's part of, and the millennials and the boomers too. So it was really interesting to hear those insights and a different approach in terms of how we all need to find some common ground.
Yeah.
Not stick rigidly to the upbringing or the values, but be open to kind of having conversations. I think that was the key thing that I'll put into practice.
Like we're doing on this podcast. We're ahead of the curve, obviously.
And how about you, Lily? What stood out for you?
I also find it really interesting how accurate all of those depictions were. And also, something that you kind of notice, you don't think about a lot, actually tracing back why people might act that way. And like, it's funny when we were talking about how Gen X are quite direct and how me and Charlie have got a bit of a joke about even things like you sending text messages. And
Screenshotting them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Gabby's right. I know not to take it personally. I know that if you send me okay, full stop, you're not necessarily annoyed with me. You're just like, why would I spend more than 2 seconds sending a text message? So that was quite funny and that was interesting. And then kind of similar to you, just about how, you need to be mindful of people's conversation styles and different ways that they like to approach issues and things. And I also appreciated Gabby saying about how if, you maybe hear some feedback that's not ideal, it is actually okay to say, okay, this is a lot. I need to have a minute to process it. Because I think I'm quite bad for being a bit people-pleasy and just being like, okay, whatever. But no, I can have a cup of tea and chill out and process things when I get told something that's maybe not aligned with how I would like to be told, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah. Take a breath. You don't have to respond in that moment, but you can be open in terms of expressing, how it lands or asking for clarification or whatever it might be. It was good. So if you've been inspired by Gabby's story, let us know in a review or a comment of this episode. We love hearing your feedback. And please do give us a 5-star rating to help other people find this episode and be just as in awe as we are of everything Gabby's achieved so far.
Our next episode, if everything goes to plan, will be a rematch of our Gen X Z quiz, but this time with a Christmas theme, of course. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Gen X Z Exchange.